Our next speaker just arrived, so I'm stretching this. Our next speaker is Matt Staver, and he is the founder and chairman of Liberty Counsel. Liberty Counsel is an international nonprofit litigation, education, and policy organization dedicated to advancing religious freedoms, the sanctity of life, and the family since 1989 by providing pro bono assistance and representation on these and other related topics. With offices in Florida, California, Virginia, and Washington, D.C., Liberty Counsel has hundreds of affiliate attorneys around the country and has a presence in Israel as well. Mr. Staver holds a bachelor, master, and Juris Doctorate degrees and an honorary doctorate of law and doctorate of divinity. He has argued 2 landmark cases before the United States Supreme Court and is lead counsel and written numerous briefs to the High Court. He has authored hundreds of popular articles, 7 scholarly law review publications, numerous brochures, and books, about 11 books, most of which focus on constitutional law, including 2 most recent books, Eternal Vigilance, Knowing and Protecting Your Religious Freedom, and the most comprehensive book ever written on religious liberty and same-sex marriage, Putting Every Household at Risk. Mr. Staver produces and hosts Faith and Freedom, a 15-minute daily radio program, and Freedom Call, a 60-second daily radio program. As a former pastor and one of the nation's preeminent constitutional attorneys, he frequently appears as a guest on national network and cable TV, radio programs, and also appears in several thousand print articles each year. Let's give Mr. Staver a warm welcome.
We moved about a month, two months ago from Altamont Springs to Lake Merritt, and you don't realize how extra time that takes to get here. So I got to reorient. So even though it's only 2 exits, it's a lot more traffic.
You just lost my
times of the day. But it's certainly a privilege to be able to get here and to be here with you and be able to share this time with you. And thank you for that kind introduction. We're going to have some time at the conclusion of my message for some Q&A, so I hope that you have questions and we can engage in some good dialogue and discussion. My message is entitled Living in the Shade of Vesuvius, and you'll understand why. My wife is president of Liberty Counsel. She's also an attorney. She's my very best friend, and we just celebrated 30 years of marriage. And on our 30th anniversary, we took a cruise to the Mediterranean, and we flew into Barcelona. We got there a couple of days early and then got on the ship and then went up the Mediterranean coast. We visited places in Spain, France, and Italy. We had a wonderful time on our 30th anniversary celebration, and we look forward to many more celebrations like that. But when we got to Italy, we stopped at Naples, and one of the places that we always wanted to see was Mount Vesuvius. So we got a chance to go to Mount Vesuvius. We saw the mountain. We got on the very top of it, and actually right now it has certain places where smoke is coming out of the mountain, so it's still an active volcano. But back in the 70 time frame, 70 AD or so, 79 AD to be exact, the people that were living in Pompeii and the other town that were right at the foot of Mount Vesuvius, they had no idea that it was a volcano because it had been inactive for 700, 800 years. And they actually had Vesuvius wine. The wine grapes were grown right there at the foot and on the side of Vesuvius. It was very rich because of all the volcanic soil that had been laid down, but it was overgrown with luscious trees and brush, and it was just a wonderful, beautiful mountain. And these individuals had no idea that they were living literally at the foot of a volcano, and that one day in 79 AD, their lives would catastrophically come to an end, and it would be the most famous volcanic eruption in our recorded history. Well, in this particular time, they actually, at the end of the day, with the heat of the Mediterranean, they literally lived in the shade of Vesuvius, because the shade would ultimately come down from that volcano and cover those two towns of Herculaneum and Pompeii. And they literally lived and they worked and they ate and they slept and they carried on their lives under the shade of this volcano and had no idea the danger that would lie ahead. But one day in 79 AD, the volcano began to erupt, and Pliny the Elder was a naval captain in the Roman army, or the Roman Navy, and he was stationed there at Naples. He had his nephew, Pliny the Younger, and he asked Pliny the Younger to be able to go with him as he was getting on the ship to go over and try to rescue the people that were fleeing from this volcanic eruption. But Pliny the Younger made a very good decision. He decided he wasn't going to follow his famous uncle that day. He decided to just stay right there at the naval shipyard, and his uncle could go on and carry out the rescue. Well, his uncle, Pliny the Elder, ultimately died in the process. He was killed along with many other people he was trying to rescue. Pliny the Younger recorded this in history about how this volcano erupted, but it went down through history. No one believed that it actually took place because they could not find any evidence of this volcanic eruption. Because what happened was, this erupted over a period of 2 to 3 days. It shot a plume all the way up to the stratosphere, the troposphere. When it got to that area where the troposphere and the stratosphere change, that volcanic column of debris and heat and ashes ultimately mushroomed and then came back down. The wind pushed it away from Naples, right on top of Pompeii and Herculaneum, and these cities were literally buried alive. And so you see some of these pictures of individuals where they're literally in different kinds of positions, where the mom is grasping onto her child, or where two people are probably husband and wives, or maybe mother and father, or mother and daughter. They're grasping onto each other in the very last moments of their lives. There's some where they're laying down peacefully. In fact, I saw a person who was laying down on the side, and he had his hands under his side of his head as he's laying down. And there's others that are in terrified positions where they're scared. We saw one of these bodies, and you could literally still see the sandals on the feet of this individual. The clothes that were on this individual were still on that person. What we have are not the actual bodies. What we have is what happened at the time. You had between 400 and 800, 900 degree heat that literally vaporized these people. So they were instantly killed by the heat. And obviously the gases suffocated them as well. But they were instantly killed. And what happened was their flesh was literally vaporized and their bones were carbonized. And what happened is, in the place of where their flesh was, ashes took that place, and so it was like a cast. So when they ever found this, 1700 years after it happened, they were able to find these individuals with like cast under the volcanic lava, and so they filled that back up with some kind of concrete or some kind of mix, and that's how we have these bodies. It's just cast that are in that lava. It was an incredible day in the lives of these individuals. They woke up that morning. They had no idea what was about ready to happen. And in fact, we found, the archaeologists did, bread still in the oven that was being baked that morning, and it was still preserved. It's the first time that we've been able to find out what a Roman really looked like, because we didn't have any archaeological evidence of what the Romans looked like. This was a typical Roman city. It was a city that was filled with paganism. You had the temple of Apollo there. You had the temple of Isis, the Egyptian god, and other temples, a major place for paganism. It was a place of sexual immorality as well. They had symbols everywhere of male sexual body parts that they would wear for good luck charms. And they had them not only as jewelry, but they had them everywhere. There was also a political campaign that was going on in 79 AD, because on the side of the wall you have some political rhetoric that was there, and it mentions this person who was running for office name, and that if you vote for this individual, you're a thief. So they were literally right in the middle of an election. You can, yeah, so, I mean, nothing is new, right? We have the same thing today. We have the same thieves up in Washington, D.C., and in the state of Florida, wherever they might be. So nothing is new. You know, like Scripture say, nothing is new under the sun. Well, nothing was new under the sun back then either. They had the politicians that were the dirty politicians just like we have today. But anyway, what we see is on that day, they were getting up, they were baking bread. We were able to walk through this city. It's amazing because when you walk through this city, this is a city that has not been destroyed, and then you have another city built on top of it, and you see little bits and pieces of it. This was a city that was buried intact. So you can walk down the road and know that this is the way the road was in 79 AD, on a particular day in history. This is the way it was. The writings on the side of the buildings, this is the way it was. You can still see the drawings on the sides of some of the buildings. The original colors are still there. The kitchens where they had their places to bake food are still there. All of the things are still intact as they were in 79 AD. And here these people were. They were literally living in the shade of Vesuvius, not realizing that when they woke up the morning of 79 AD, their existence would literally come to an end, and everybody that they knew would just simply be completely wiped out. And apparently this volcano may have erupted 700-800 years before, and cities had been wiped out, and so we lost all the history. So this was an incredible moment just to walk through this time and realize that one day in 79 AD, about 2,000 years ago, these people got up just like you and I. They looked out, they saw this beautiful volcano that they had known. They had the Vesuvius wine that many of them no doubt had drunk. It was very famous. They had all of their things that were going on. They were baking bread. They were doing everything. They were engaged in a political campaign. And they woke up that day and everything catastrophically changed. You know, I think that we're living in the shade of Vesuvius. We're living in a situation where our country is in a situation. We've enjoyed the liberty from the United States of America and the blood that was shed to give us that liberty through history. Those that sacrificed their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. And we're living at that time where this entire existence as we know it could catastrophically come to an end. You know, in terms of where we are in American history, and I want to mention American history, because in terms of Judeo-Christian history, things have actually been worse. But in terms of American history, as we know it, as Americans from the beginning of this country till now, we're living at some of the most difficult, challenging times in our history. Unprecedented times, for example. Let me just give a couple of different reasons why I say that. Every generation has said that we're living in unprecedented times. These times are worse than what happened before. But there's a couple of things that make our times even more critical, more significant, more unprecedented than any other time in our 200 plus years of the United States of America. Let me just take one for example. Obamacare. For the first time in history, through our federal government, we are being forced to kill innocent children. You know, never in the history of any civilization, including Nazi Germany, were the people forced to participate in the Holocaust. The Holocaust occurred. They may not have liked it. They may have stayed silent. They may have been intimidated against the government, but they weren't forced to participate in actually putting people in the gas chambers or running the gas chambers. They could walk by, they could close their eyes, but they weren't forced to participate. In any genocide in any part of the world throughout history, the general population was not required to participate in genocide. And now for the first time in American history, not only do we have the slaughter of innocent children, 1 every 20 seconds, 55 million since 1973. Not only do we have that, and we can drive by abortion clinics, and we can turn our eyes and turn our gaze and pretend that it doesn't happen, and we can decry what's happening in the government, but we have now a government system that says to little sisters of the poor, you can carry out your mission, your calling to minister to the 13,000 elderly and infirm and disabled and those people that are on the periphery of society. You can do that in 31 different places, 30 in the United States, 1 overseas. Little Sisters of the Poor, you can do that, and that's your mission, but as a prerequisite to do that, you have to participate in a Holocaust and kill children as a prerequisite to do that. Liberty University, if you want to train champions for Christ, you have to participate in a Holocaust. Hobby Lobby, if you want to run a business based upon religious principles or Chick-fil-A or whatever it might be, you have to participate in a Holocaust to kill unborn innocent children. Understand, we've never been in that situation before. No matter how bad things have been in America, no matter what has happened, we've never been forced to participate. And unless you think that, well, Hobby Lobby dodged the bullet by a 5-4 decision, that's just Hobby Lobby for closely held corporations. It doesn't apply to other corporations that are not closely held. It doesn't apply to nonprofit organizations. That decision still has not been rendered regarding Little Sisters of the Poor, Catholic Charities, or Florida Hospital, or the Baptist hospitals, or some of these other institutions like Liberty University, and you go on and on and on. It doesn't apply to those individuals, those entities. And they have religious missions that the First Amendment of the United States says that Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion, nor prohibit the free exercise thereof. And the freedom of conscience, the free exercise of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of association is all being set aside so that the agenda of this administration can be carried out, and that is participate in a Holocaust of unprecedented magnitude. That we've never participated in history, and no nation has forced their citizens to do so. And in case you say, well, that's just for the employers, no, it's not. I was speaking to individuals in Michigan, and one of the things that at Liberty Counsel we have been emphasizing that you don't really see much in the media, and people don't really think about it, is the individuals that also have to do that. Because if you are in an insurance plan, whether in an exchange or some other kind of insurance that provides anyone within that entire system abortion coverage, then in addition to your premiums, you have to now pay a separate premium monthly that goes into a segregated fund, and there's only one purpose for that fund. It's not for knee surgeries, it's not for colds, it's not for tonsils, it's not for anything like that. It is for one purpose, and it is for the purpose solely of abortion, taking the lives of unborn children. And I was giving this message to a group of people in Michigan. There was a teacher that came up to me afterward. Their teachers union just told them that they had to pay $20 a month in addition to their premiums for that very purpose, and there was no way to opt out of it. Now, you might say, well, I will, if I go out into the exchange and find an insurance plan, I'll just pick one that doesn't cover abortion so I won't have that problem. Well, no, you can't do that, because what the Obamacare law did was have a secrecy clause. And the secrecy clause prohibits the insurance companies from allowing you to know what's covered. So imagine when you go buy car insurance or life insurance or health insurance and you say, well, what's covered? Well, A, B, and C. Well, I don't need C, just give me A and B. And what's the cost of that? It's a different cost than A, B, and C. Well, you can't do that with Obamacare, because they knew if people had the choice, they would not choose to participate in a fund where they had to fund abortion. Who wants to fund abortion? And no matter whether you're young, old, no matter what it is, you have to do it. So the only time you can find out what's in the plan is once you've paid your money, you're locked in for at least a year for that premium, and you can't get out of it and go someplace else. Then after that, they give you what's covered. So it's Russian roulette. That's done solely for that reason. Now, that's one thing that's happening in America that is unprecedented. Another thing that's happening is the deconstruction of family, the deconstruction of marriage as the union of a man and a woman. You know, now we have the judge in Virginia that ultimately struck down Virginia's marriage law, appointed by President Obama. This judge in the decision says, we know that the Constitution says, quote, all men are created equal, close quote. Well, that judge is trying to tell us what the Constitution allegedly says about marriage, and yet that judge and her law clerks that have graduated from law school, that are working for her, that have been reading through this opinion before they release it to the public, have no clue between the Declaration of Independence, which does contain that phrase, and the U.S. Constitution, which does not contain that phrase. And so here's a judge saying, we know that the Constitution says, quote, all men are created equal, close quote. It doesn't say that. The Declaration says it. So here's a judge who has no clue about the Constitution trying to lecture us about what the Constitution allegedly says on marriage. And we have a judge in another state that says that it's time for marriage to be relegated to the trash bin of history. Wow. Trash bin of history. You know, there's a couple of things that are part and parcel of natural law. And if you go back to Martin Luther King Jr., Martin Luther King Jr. was in the Birmingham jail, and he wrote the letter from the Birmingham jail. I encourage you to read it. He was asked the question, Martin, why are you disobeying some laws and other laws you obey? And he says, well, that's easy. And he relied upon several thousand years of ideas and Judeo-Christian and Western legal thought. And he said, because there are some laws that are just, and you have to obey them. And there are some laws that are unjust, and you have to disobey them. And in fact, you have a duty to disobey them. Now, there's obviously laws that we don't like. There may be irritating. We might want to drive faster on the highway than, 65 or 70, or I won't say how fast I was going on the way over. But I wish that those irritating numbers on the sign were much larger than they were, and was hoping I didn't see, red and blue lights flashing. Thank God I didn't. But those are irritating things, but those are not part of what would be called natural law, part of the natural created order. But there are certain things that are part of the natural created order. The founders in the Declaration hearkened to those. The individual liberty that the Declaration says we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And when government ultimately begins to evince a pattern, to participate in a pattern and a practice to undermine those rights, it's our right, no, indeed, it's our duty to overthrow such government and to provide new guards for our future security. So there are certain times when government crosses the line. Think about this issue of marriage. What is more objectively observable than male and female? What is more objectively observable that predates religion? Marriage is not a religious issue. It's not a political issue. The idea of you and I being created as in the image of God by our Creator as male and female predates any political structure. It predates any religion or denomination. We didn't create religion, or religion didn't create marriage. We didn't go to the polls in 2008 and say, we're going to all of a sudden now affirm, and this is our opinion on marriage. We no more create marriage than we create the law of gravity. It is part and parcel of the natural created order. We can give it a name, we can change the name, but it doesn't really matter. It is there because it's part of the natural created order. Marriage is part of the natural created order. To say that same-sex marriage is going to be permissible disrupts that natural created order. It completely undermines the natural created order. And what it does as a policy matter is say this: boys and girls, you don't need moms and dads. Your mom and dad are absolutely irrelevant to your well-being. And if you believe that, go with me to any jail in any part of any country or prison, and let's talk to the young men that are incarcerated for violent crimes. And let's ask them one question. And the question would be, young man, where was your father when you were growing up? And you know what that young man will say? I had no father, or my father wasn't there. Now, not everybody who grows up fatherless gets in jail, but everyone who's in those jails have one thing in common, and they were fatherless. If you look at every study, in fact, the most recent peer-reviewed study from the University of Texas about children who are raised in these households, children do worse on every level of study and evaluation when they're raised in a house with a same-sex couple as compared when they're raised in a house with mom and dad. Male and female, mom and dad bring something different and unique to that young boy and that young girl's life as they are growing up to be men and women. It brings something different, and you simply can't substitute it. What same-sex marriage as a policy says is Florida, we as Floridians are going to say to children, we are going to put you in a household where you will forever be precluded from having a mother or a father. And not only be precluded from having the opposite gender parent, but not only that, but having the opposite gender skewed in a way that single parenting would never do. It damages children. It hurts children. We can go on and on about the studies that are in existence. But it also hurts our liberty. Take, for example, in Massachusetts, when same-sex marriage came to that state. When it came to that state, Catholic Charities said, we can't continue, our mission is to put orphans into homes with moms and dads. That's what we're called to do. And what ultimately happened when Governor Romney was the governor there, they said, we can't put children in same-sex households, and they were told, you have to do that now that the marriage laws have been changed. And they said, we can't do it. So what did Catholic Charities do? Catholic Charities ceased operations. They no longer participate in adoptions, and that's happened in state after state where same-sex marriage comes into existence. Or you take New Mexico, for example. In New Mexico, the wedding photographer has to participate in a same-sex ceremony. The wedding photographer said, but listen, I don't discriminate against white people, but I won't photograph an event where they put on hoods and they start burning crosses like a KKK rally, because that would be offensive to my religious beliefs. And similarly, I don't discriminate against somebody because of their sexual orientation, but I can't photograph an event that celebrates a moment, an event that is contrary to my religious belief. And they said, well, no, if you don't photograph the event, then you can't photograph. You can't be your professional photographer. And so she lost that case. We are entering into a situation, this is not a matter of whether you can coexist. This is not a matter of whether two people should live in the same household and we shouldn't have anything to do and the government should have hands off. This is a coercive agenda. Every single person, whether you're in kindergarten, whether you're in the professions as an attorney, as a counselor, schools, every single one of us will be forced to affirm that which we cannot accept. This is not abortion is here. We don't like it, but we're not forced. Now we are. This is, when it hits you, you will be forced to comply. You will be forced to comply under penalty of law. And this administration, although it is pulling back the influence of the United States in the Middle East and around the world and weakening our allies and weakening the United States of America, on the other hand, this administration is very colonial in promoting its anti-Judeo-Christian values, not just here in the United States, but around the world. This administration, as I visited in Lima, Peru, and spoke to Congress there, this administration is using our State Department dollars to force other countries to liberalize their laws on abortion and same-sex marriage. Otherwise, they will pull back the State Department dollars. This administration is appointing ambassadors who are engaged in same-sex relationships to go everywhere, for example, in Buenos Aires and in other places and all around Latin America, to literally work to undermine the laws. Our ambassadors historically have and are required to respect the laws of the country in which they are ambassador to. But this administration is actually having ambassadors actively work and promote publicly the undermining of the laws in those nations where they are assigned. It's unprecedented. Now, let's move on to something else, not only in these issues of social matters, but certainly in our issues of national security. This administration has made the United States of America and the Middle East most weakened in our history. You know, we thought it was bad during Jimmy Carter, and we thought that we had a fight on our hands during the Cold War when Ronald Reagan was here with Russia. But none of those compare to what's happening now, with what's taking place with radical Islam in the Middle East and right here in the United States of America. None of that is comparable. Liberty Counsel has an outreach to Israel. We have Christians in Defense of Israel. It has about 250,000 people that's part of that now. And some of the people here actually came with us to Israel. And you came in September of 11, wasn't it? No, May of 11, yeah. Yeah, May of 12, wasn't it? Yeah, May of 12. But when you talk to the Israeli leaders, I was sitting in December of 2013 at the Knesset, And we had the deputy speaker of the Knesset, which is their parliament. So this is the number 2 person who's the speaker in the legislature. And this individual was talking about what this administration is doing in the Middle East. How our ally, Saudi Arabia, no longer trusts us anymore. They will not go out and stick their neck on the line anymore because they don't believe that this administration will support them if they do. So they're playing their cards. And with regards to the nuclearization of the Middle East, it's not just whether Iran can get a nuclear bomb, but it's how close will Saudi Arabia and others wait before they become nuclear as well. Because Saudi Arabia has the money, they can go buy a nuclear weapon. And they will do it as a matter of self-defense because they no longer trust the United States of America to come in and bring security in the Middle East. So once we go nuclear throughout the Middle East, and especially once Iran becomes nuclear, and it seems that there's no resolve on this administration to stop that, Israel will be the first target, but I can tell you who the second target will be. It'll be the United States of America. Make no mistake about it. They call Israel the little Satan, and they call the United States of America the big Satan. And there's a few things that government ought to do, and one of the things that ought to do, in many respects it ought to get out of our way in a lot of ways, but it ought to at least provide for our security. And this administration is not only not providing for our security, but it is weakening the United States of America, and it is weakening our allies. It is empowering Al-Qaeda and ISIS and all of the other radical Islamic groups by showing weakness and by trying to negotiate. You do not negotiate with terrorists. And in fact, the West doesn't understand what's happening there. Let me give you an example. Sheldon Schulman is an individual who is involved in a lot of national security policy issues. He gave a lecture to our group this year recently, and he's giving a story about trying to help us understand the Middle Eastern mindset. First of all, he talks about the tribalness of the Middle East and how when the whole Middle East was carved up by Great Britain, they just came in and put different boundary lines in, not even thinking about how that was going to impact the different boundaries. And so they set up all of these Middle Eastern countries, and they had no correlation one to another in terms of the people who were living there. And all of this tribalism, people grow up and they're loyal to the tribe. They want a loan, they get it from the tribe. They want security, they get it from the tribe. So you have all this infighting tribalism within the countries themselves. So that's one thing. That's a difficult matter to deal with. But the other thing is just the mindset. The mindset is one where he gave an illustration. He's living in the green zone in Israel, and he's living where someone is his neighbor. They're out in the backyard, and their 2 kids are out there kicking the soccer ball around. And Sheldon is a Jew, the other is an Arab, and ultimately Sheldon looks to his neighbor friend and he says, "This is what we dream about. That our sons and our daughters one day, they can grow up in peace and friendship." And the neighbor looks at him and he said, "The only reason why we don't destroy you is because you're more powerful than we are. But if we get to the point where we have more power than you, we will destroy Israel and wipe you off the map." This is your neighbor. The West doesn't understand the mindset that's going on over there. The West doesn't understand that when Hamas was lobbing bombs into Israel, that they literally would take children and put it in front of a sniper as the sniper would try to take out an Israeli IDF soldier, and they would put kids in front of them so that the IDF soldier wouldn't shoot, and if they shot them, they would take out one of the young kids. They gave them 250,000 hand grenades and told these children, find an IDF soldier and blow yourself up to kill that Israeli soldier. So you got 250, 250,000 hand grenades right now in the hands of children. This administration has no interest in protecting our allies, and certainly once we empower them here, we've got United States citizens that are going over to Syria and other places in the Middle East getting training, and they have the ability to come directly back in the United States. We are weakening the United States of America. This administration certainly, in many respects, and it's not just Democrats, it's also Republicans that have misunderstood the role of government outside of the issue of national security. With regards to individual freedom in taking the resources that ultimately individuals are able to grow and engage in, to tax our resources beyond what is necessary, to spend money that is just like it's going out of style, like there is no budget to deal with. This administration goes against every principle of liberty, but it's not just this administration. This has been going on for a period of time, where our federal government has continued to grow way beyond its authority, where even, for example, we have the Department of Homeland Security. That was under a Republican administration, a brand new federal regulation. The Department of Education comes under Jimmy Carter, a brand new education bureaucracy that micromanages all the kinds of things that take place within education. We've got so many agencies and departments, and one of the things that's happening, besides the fact that government has grown really beyond its constitutional parameters, and also the vision of the Founding Fathers, is one of the things that we're seeing, that I know that's happening within these agencies, is that this administration, different than anything else, has made it very hostile for people of values, faith, liberty-minded people to continue to work in those agencies. Long after this president is gone, long after 2016, no matter who we get in the White House, and hopefully we get someone who will stand for the values on which this country was founded. And we've got to work very hard to do that. But whoever that is, notwithstanding, what's going to happen is this train will continue to move. We have, for example, hired at Liberty University School of Law, African-American female, who worked in one of the agencies. She became acting general counsel when the general counsel position got vacated, and she ultimately could have been general counsel. She decided to leave. She had been in that agency, worked her way up through more than one administration, but when President Obama came into office, he made the environment so pro-homosexual that anybody with any kind of contrary values would be pushed out. So the people that had already worked their way up, it's so hostile to them, and the people that are the lower level civil servants that have job protection, they're leaving. They're leaving, and he's pointing these people to head it up with 6-year terms that will certainly out-survive his presidency, but then all the different day-to-day operations, whether it's the FAA or the EEOC with regards to employment, or the Federal Trade Commission, you name all the different agencies. They run everything in our lives. They provide all these different rules and regulations, and we don't have any real input on some of those. They put out something, for example, regarding the IRS. They put out these regulations about whether they should regulate 501c4 organizations and prohibit them from engaging in political activity. They put that out there, but then at the end of the day, you have a short period of time. You and I don't know that that's taking place, and no matter what we say, they then have their little bureaucracy friends that ultimately vote to do what they want to. And those rules and regulations then change policy and affect us. And every one of these agencies intrude in our liberty. There's many, many more than are necessary. We ought to abolish a lot of these agencies, beginning, obviously, with the Internal Revenue Service. But what they're doing is they are putting into position people who are ideologically in line with President Obama. You know, the Republicans take, for example, the judicial appointments. Judicial appointments for all the Republicans, even Ronald Reagan, have sometimes been hit and miss. You know, Ronald Reagan, as much as I love Ronald Reagan makes some mistakes in his judicial appointment. One of those was Justice Sandra Day O'Connor. He wanted to appoint the first woman to the bench. Well, and that's great. I'm all for that, but it needs to be the right woman with the right judicial philosophy. And unfortunately, he appointed Sandra Day O'Connor, who was not the right woman. And so we have had to live under that particular result for a number of years, and those cases are still out there. And, you know, you have different people that have appointed, like Souter was a Republican, appointed under George Bush. It was before the internet and before all the social media. There was pushback. Sununu ultimately gave the go-ahead to George H. Bush that he ought to be a good person. He was a New Hampshire Supreme Court justice. And because of that, he got in and he became a very terrible judge. But when Obama appoints judges or justices to the United States Supreme Court, they are not middle of the road. They are not hit and miss. They are the most radical of the radical. Take, for example, just what happened with this nuclear option in the District Court of Appeals. The District Court of Appeals, on the same day, there were two different cases, one from the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals in Richmond, Virginia, one from the District of Columbia Court of Appeals in Washington, D.C., and they both were dealing with the same issue, and that is whether or not these exchanges, these reimbursement for going outside of your insurance policy and going into purchasing something in the exchange, whether or not the federal government could give you a reimbursement, a subsidy for that. Well, the Obamacare law assumed that all the states would ultimately comply, and therefore you would never have this situation. But now you've got half of the states that have rejected these exchanges, and so they're run by the federal government and not by the state. The law itself does not allow in those 26, 27 states someone to go out into the exchange and get a subsidy for it if it's not run by the state. Now, the Fourth Circuit, with Obama appointees on that day, came and upheld the law. The other one in Washington, D.C., struck it down, said it's unconstitutional. Well, what happened just before that? The Senator Harry Reid in the U.S. Senate, they did what's called the nuclear option. They took away the filibuster, so now all you need, historically, they've changed the rules that have been in existence in the Senate for 200 years or more. And so they pushed through, as a result of that, these three appointments to the District Court of Appeals, these three radical of the radical Obama appointments, and they got confirmed by a narrow majority vote because of the Democrat-Republican split in the U.S. Senate. Now, what happened? Just within a week, they have now decided they want to rehear this case, meaning that now when it goes to the entire panel, not just 3 judges, but now with these new 3 additional Obama appointment judges, most likely what they will do is reverse it and uphold the law. These people are going to be on the bench for 20, 30, sometimes maybe even 40 years. Every single one of these judges that I have argued before in the last several years, whether it's at the Federal District Court or the Federal Court of Appeals, is a radical ideologue. I mean, they're not middle of the road. They are, of all the different kinds of individuals that you have heard about that Obama has appointed, whether they're czars or whoever they might be or whoever he's hung around with, those are the kinds of people that are on the federal bench, and they're there for decades. And they're not middle of the road. They could care less about the Constitution. It's just like this one in Virginia who literally does not know the difference between the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. So we're living at times that are unprecedented in American history. But let me move to something a little bit more encouraging, and then we'll open up for some Q&A. If you look at, for example, Judeo-Christian history, the times that we're living in are not unprecedented. If you look at what happened to the Jews in Egypt, where Pharaoh had been persecuting them and just crushing their humanity, how is it that this little band of people that were unarmed would ultimately be able to survive the greatest, most powerful nation, brutal nation on the planet, yet instead of mourning the end of the Jews and the nation of Israel, today we celebrate Passover. If you go further in Judeo-Christian history, you see that during the time of the Persian king was the most powerful nation on earth. I mean, there was no equal to the Persian king. It was the superpower. And when the Persian king issued a decree, it couldn't be amended. There was no recourse. You couldn't protest. There was no impeachment. Whatever that king said in that decree, it was going to happen. And on a specific day, there was going to be a day where all the Jews were going to be annihilated. All of them were going to be annihilated. It's like January 1. Things are bad, but January 1, all of us are going to be killed. All liberty-minded people are going to be wiped out and killed on January 1. I mean, how bad could that be? But that's what they were facing. Much worse than any of the situations we're facing. And God turned it around because God is a God of irony. And what ultimately happened was Haman, who built the gallows for his arch enemy Mordecai, was not only hung on those gallows, but he was called into the king, and the king said, what shall I do for a man that pleases me, whom the king wants to honor? And so he's thinking, obviously, that's got to be me. And so he gives all of this. Well, you need to put him on a horse and give him a robe and have someone walk him through the town, and said, this is what we do to a man whom the king wants to honor. And he says, great idea, Haman, do that to Mordecai. 180 degrees turned around. And instead of the mourning of the end of the Jewish people today, they celebrate the Feast of Purim. You know, when you go to Israel and you stand in the place, the epicenter of paganism, which is where the god Pan was ultimately worshipped, where we get the word panic, where they would sacrifice these goats or lambs and they would throw them into the water, and depending upon whether they sank or floated, that time frame as to whether the sacrifice was being accepted was the panic time. And they would hopefully have their sacrifice accepted. And others are still, the memorials, the altars are still carved into the side of those mountains. And that's where Jesus was with his disciples. And Jesus asked them, who do people say that I am? Well, some say that you're Elijah, John the Baptist, or one of the prophets. And he said, well, who do you say that I am? And he says, well, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And he said, flesh and blood has not revealed this to you. You are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church. And the gates of hell, which is what they were called, the gates of Hades, this epicenter of evil, paganism, this will not prevail against my church. And if you look at what happened to this band of individuals 200 plus years ago, who were just normal individuals who loved life, loved liberty, they loved God, they took on the greatest, most powerful nation in the world. And today we celebrate Independence Day. And you know, Harry Mahet, who's a senior litigation counsel for Liberty Counsel, December 25, 1989, when he was 12 years old, was his very first day of freedom. He lived in communist Romania. Communist Romania, it was much more repressive than what we have today. His dad was beaten, like other pastors had been beaten by the communists. In fact, one day, the communists came, they knocked on his door at night, and they had the German Shepherd dogs because they had suspected that the contraband of Bibles smuggled in by the missionaries were somehow in this house. Well, they actually were in the house. His dad went to go meet them as they brought in their German Shepherds. His mom went into the kitchen where those Bibles were, and they were in a stack right in the middle of the kitchen. So she took a piece of plywood, put it on there. It's kind of awkward, not quite even, but you know, for communists, it worked pretty good. And they threw a blanket over it, and it looked just like a table, kind of awkward, but you know, it's close enough for communism. And she then put on the coffee grounds that were smuggled in by the missionaries. Well, in communist Romania, you only had one kind of coffee. So here's this nice, fresh, new flavor of coffee smelling through the house. And what does she do? She serves the coffee on the top of the table under which the Bibles were located. Well, the dogs loved the smell, so they didn't smell out the contraband that was there. The secret police, they enjoyed the coffee. They had a good time. They walked away. They never found the Bibles. Well, it happened that 2 weeks before Christmas in 1989, a pastor in his town of about 400,000 was arrested. But instead of going home and just taking it like they had before, they went out in front of this pastor's home and they began to pray. And nightfall fell and they continued to pray. And the people of the town came out, and more people came out, and more people came out. It caught the attention of the dictator, Ceausescu. So he sent his troops in to this town, and they were to fire on their own people. But they were reluctant to kill their own people. They were reluctant to pull the trigger. But in another town in Romania, something similar happened. So Ceausescu wanted to put his iron hand down and stop this uprising. And so he called a meeting in Bucharest, the capital. And while he's speaking, the people began to shout, "Libertate, libertate, liberty, liberty." Because the human spirit longs for liberty. And they would say, "We need God, we need God." And while Ceausescu was speaking and the people got even more unruly, they ultimately went after him, they captured him, they tried him, convicted him, and hung him in a period of 24 hours. And on Christmas Day, December 25, 1989, Harry and his family and the rest of the Romanians woke up and they felt freedom for the very first time in their life. And all of that happened just 2 weeks before. You know, I say that we are in a situation today, like Martin Luther King. There are certain things that we have to obey. They're just laws, but there are certain things that are taking place that are absolutely unjust. We are coming to a time in American history where we're facing that, where we're going to have to make a decision, like the Founding Fathers had to make a decision, Like people throughout history had to make a decision. Like Daniel had to make a decision when he was told, you can't pray. And what did he do? He opened up his windows and he prayed so people could hear him. He didn't hide it. He had to come to a position where he said, enough is enough. I would rather die than be a slave. I would rather ultimately sacrifice my own life, my fortune, and my sacred honor, than to ultimately be a slave under this tyrannous system. We are coming to a point like that. I would say that ratchet back the time of 2004, 2005, when Catholic Charities said, we can't participate, we're going to stop our operation. I appreciate Catholic Charities' resolve. But here's what I say in retrospect they should do, and anyone else should do, that if that happens, if Little Sisters of the Poor is ultimately coming to the final point where they are told, in order to carry out your mission, you've got to kill children, they ought to say, that may be your awful decision. That may be your opinion. But we are called to do something even greater and higher. And if you don't like it, bring out your National Guard and let's see what happens. You know, we have to get to the point where and I'm an attorney, we've got cases that go up to the United States Supreme Court, so I say this as an officer of the court, but also someone who understands the history of the court. And that is, we've got to get to the point where we just don't simply sit back every time a judge writes a stupid decision in the privacy of his or her own chambers, releases it out, and all of a sudden we all bow down and worship it and say, I guess that's what happened. We just lost another liberty today. You know, you go back to the Dred Scott decision, when Chief Justice Taney, who ultimately was in opposition to Abraham Lincoln, issued the decision that said, blacks, you're not citizens. Why? Because you're, quote, inferior human beings? I mean, that was not consistent with the Constitution. That was not consistent with natural or revealed law or common sense. It was a bigoted decision then, and no one would accept it now. Back then, we should have said, we're not going to listen to it. That's just a judge's bigoted decision. And when Carrie Buck in Virginia was taken by the government of Virginia and forcibly sterilized, she sought justice before the United States Supreme Court. And Oliver Wendell Holmes wrote the decision and said, sorry, Carrie, no justice for you. Indeed, 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. And because of your IQ, Virginia has a right to stop you from propagating others who might also have low IQ. Well, that law became part of the eugenics law that spread throughout the United States of America. And guess whose attention it caught? It caught Adolf Hitler's attention, and it became the eugenics law in Nazi Germany. And guess what was ultimately cited during the Nuremberg trials as a defense of what the Nazis were doing? Buck versus Bell from the United States Supreme Court. That decision was bigoted, wrong, contrary to the Constitution, natural law, revealed law, and common sense, and human dignity. It is now in the trash bin of history, but back then it should never have been respected then any more than it is now. And I can tell you what, if the Supreme Court of the United States within the next year or two ultimately deconstructs marriage, we ought to have the same exact response. That's your bigoted decision, but that is part of the natural created order, and I don't really care what 5 of these justices say. That is not part of the Constitution, and it's not part of who we are. We need to get to the point where this judiciary is reined into its authority and not go on beyond it, because it has gone far beyond what it was intended to do. Well, I think that we're living at amazing times. They're unprecedented in American history. But as I look through Judeo-Christian history and throughout history of America, there were times that were even worse for our founders at the very beginning, for those throughout Judeo-Christian history. For Harry Mahet, who works with us now and defends liberty and life and family. There were worse times, and those times turned around in a heartbeat. And I believe that we are living in those exciting times. And what needs to happen is God's people, liberty-minding, liberty-loving people need to stand up, because this is a time that we can't be pushed and bullied around. This is a time where we're going to see a distinction between those who really have the courage and those who ultimately want to capitulate to the overpowering state. This is a time, however, that all of it could turn around, and that we could deliver to our future generation a liberty-loving country that still believes that we are one nation under God, that we are created by our Creator and endowed with certain unalienable rights that government can't take away and government can't modify, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That America can still be a shining city on a hill, and instead of that candle going out, that it could actually burn brighter and be the beacon of liberty and hope, not only for us here in the United States, but all around the world. I believe that we're living in those times. Let me open up for some time for questions. Yes?
Would it be beneficial in defending or talking about the institution of marriage in a legal sense to use the term matrimony, since it comes from the Latin madre meaning mother and man meaning man?
Yeah.
And being able to interchange that and say this is where it's derived from, that is the definition of marriage.
Yeah, I think so. I think that is true. You go back, for example, to early American history. We have a judge recently who said that polygamy laws in Utah are unconstitutional. And when you think about it, if gender no longer matters in the relationship, then it doesn't matter if you have two people of the opposite sex, same sex, or two people of the same sex and opposite sex. And that's what he did. If you go back in our history, Utah, New Mexico, and 5 states are actually required as a prerequisite from becoming a territory to becoming a state to abandon polygamy. And the reason they were, because they believed, rightly so, that through history the family is the very first form of government. You start weakening the family, and you ultimately weaken government. You weaken family, you ultimately hurt our liberties. Our government is only, our communities are only as strong as that nuclear family. You start to deconstruct that family, and you deconstruct our society. Yes? Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, well, as we sit here and listen, and
Vicki,
I
stand
know
up so we can hear you.
I get fired up about it and think, what can I do? What can we do? But what can we do? I'd like to see us as huge groups march on Washington. Let it be known that we are fed up. But what can we do?
Well, that's a good question. I think we need to do things like that, Washington, as well as I can tell you what, that we're not going to have to wait very long. 12 to 24 months is what I'm predicting, where we're actually going to be forced to get around a Little Sisters of the Poor or a Hobby Lobby and just say, we're not going to let the government come in here and shut this place down. I think we're 12 to 24 months from that. Certainly getting together and marching is good. I think we need to get our people obviously registered to vote. One of the things that we're doing, and we're going across the country all the way up through November in the significant states, 9 to 11 states, meeting with pastors. We've been doing it here. 4 to 6 weeks later, we're coming back and having rallies in churches called Who Will Stand Rally. And the meetings with pastors are encouraging them to speak up and ultimately address issues and values and not be intimidated, and that the IRS is not to be afraid of, and to encourage people to register, to vote, and to vote values. And that's what we're doing with others as well. We need to get people to the polls. One of the questions that's here is, can we impeach Obama and Eric Holder? I think both of them have engaged in actions that well deserve impeachment. You know, we have some of the Republican leadership. I think, you know, in the upcoming November election, we need to add people in the House that are very solid individuals who will fight for our values and our liberties. And in the Senate, we need to change the composition of the Senate so that we stop what's happening for the next 2 years in this Obama administration. But, you know, once we get past that, I know some of the Republican leaderships are saying, well, I don't know if I want to impeach him now because it might be a political issue and it might backfire.
Might be political.
You know, the fact of the matter is, if they're not going to do it now, we need to hold their feet to the fire and do it after the November election.
Amen.
Because if anyone needs to be impeached, it's this president. We might not be able to convict him in the Senate, but I know we have the votes in the House to impeach him, like happened with Bill Clinton. And what happened with him? It kind of distracted him for the latter part of his presidency. He didn't get convicted in the Senate, but he got indicted if it were in the House. And I think we ought to do that with both Holder as well as Obama. Yes, ma'am.
Hi. I was going to ask you to discuss your approval stand, but the other question I had, I've heard a video argument by a lawyer recently who said to win the same-sex marriage argument, we need to base marriage on the welfare of the children.
Yes.
I'm wondering what your opinion, I don't know if you've heard it, but I'm wondering what your opinion on an argument like that would be.
I do that all the time. When, there's a lot of different reasons with regards to same-sex activity in marriage, why we shouldn't go down the road. A lot of reasons. But for the typical general audience, I focus on children. I was doing that on NPR, and I was talking about how children are raised best with a mom and a dad, that male and female. Mom and dad, they just bring something different. For example, this is not stereotypical, but it's just reality. What happens when a dad gets a little son or daughter? What do? They're like throwing him up in the air, and they're like, yeah, they're scared to death. But what is it doing? It's dad as the risk taker, and teaching that son or daughter, hey, you can trust me. You don't see moms doing that. Rarely do you see. How many moms have just thrown their kids up in the air? Let me see your hands. Okay. But how many dads have done that?
How about out the window?
All right, see, there's obviously differences, and people will do different things, and some will throw them up, some won't. But, the fact of the matter is mom and dad, male and female, bring certain characteristics to their kids that the opposite sex won't. For example, my granddaughter, she's living with us now, but she's from a broken home. She's 14, just turned 15, and her dad is the only one there. Now, how does dad talk to her when she starts to have certain things happen, like her period? What does he do? He gets on the phone, he calls my wife. What do I say? I don't know what to say. But for a woman, it's just, okay, this is what, there are differences that happen. So I was talking on NPR, a lesbian called in, and I said, oh, here it is, I'm going to get blasted. And she agreed with me. She said, it is, we have a hard time, we try to bring in another male to try to get that male figure, but it still doesn't work. Then I had a young man that called in. He had been raised by 2 lesbians, and I thought, here it goes. And he agreed with me as well, that not only did he miss the father, but the 2 women, it's not just eliminating the gender, it skews the view of the missing gender. So the 2 women have a different view of the absent gender than a single mom would, who is heterosexual. That's the way it is. And he agreed with me as well. I think that is and I think, in fact, that's the way I do it to a broader audience. Yes, sir.
I'm here actually with two different reasons, but I'm here with the Tea Party, but I'm also here with Florida Family Policy Council, Florida Family Action.
Yes.
You're very familiar with my boss, John Staver.
Yes.
We work together a lot. And our job for Florida Family Action is to make his legislative job lighter by having fewer incidents come up where the government steps on religious liberties. The way we do that is we try to educate the Christian population. Yes, get them out to vote, but make sure it's an educated vote so they actually vote their values and understand which candidates match up to those values. So I know Glinda over there who just spoke, she's come out and volunteered with us.
Let him answer the question.
All right. So I wanted to actually to talk about that. This is an option for what you can do, and
I think it is an option for clearly what you can do. Florida Family Policy and Action are doing great jobs. Others are doing good jobs getting out those voter guides. Liberty Counsel, lc.org, we're doing that as well. We're actually creating some online training. The first one should be done within the next month, so you can do online training on the role of government, citizen activism. We're going to do additional online training as well to try to educate and give specific tools for people to be able to engage in. Yes, ma'am. I don't want to, I think I'm over my time, and I want to respect the time.
Just want to thank you for being here and thank God for you to begin with, because
Liberty Counsel?
They sent us all the supplies we needed to go. We went to 115 churches in the Ocala area, Spar, and there was a couple of other counties. But anyways, we went to 115 churches. It took us all weekend long, but we worked hard at it. We went out and bought big baggies, put your disc in there about the pastors, the priests, all information and stickers in there. I couldn't tell you what you folks had sent us, but we did it, and we got rid of 115 packages.
Thank you. Thank you. And if you want that, we have...
I'm not done.
Okay.
Not one packages.
Not one?
Churches, not one.
Not one what?
Not one of the churches got back. You know, we have the disc DVD. If you want to give it out to your pastor, your priest, it's called Silence is Not an Option. John Hagee, I gave it to him. He called me up and he said, I feel like an inmate just let out of prison. He says, now I know what I can say. Everyone tells me what I can't do and say, you told me what I can do. And that's really what we're wanting to do, is free up pastors and priests to be able to speak. There's another question here. Is the Constitutional Convention a good thing? It is if you can control this. You know, our Constitution's pretty good. We just need to obey it. And when people don't obey it, then we need to impeach people who don't. Starting with the President of the United States. And starting with Eric Holder. And judges as well, who just simply write these ideological opinions. So I like the Constitution we have. It's just, we've got to obey it. And I'm a little concerned about a constitutional convention. I know that there's a discussion about that. I'm just a little concerned as to what happens if, once this thing gets open, can it get too far away from us? Whether it's a good thing to have a constitutional convention, where you basically have certain things you want to amend into the Constitution. What should we say to Democrats and Republicans and elected officials to let them know what we want? Well, one of the things that we have, and I know Florida Family Policy Council and others have, we've got an email. You can go to libertycounsel.com. It's C-O-U-N-S-E-L, libertycounsel.com, or lc.org, but libertycounsel.com. And we have an email with several 100,000 people, almost 500,000 people on it. And so for different things, whether it's in the state of Florida or whether it's in Washington, D.C., people can make their voice known to them. And we will have different options for you, faxes, petitions, other kinds of things that you can ultimately communicate your ideas and values to. Yes. One question back here.
Yes, now I just want to offer one clarification. What the Convention of States is advocating is not a constitutional convention, but a convention to propose amendments to address the topics that you're talking about.
Yeah, that's a difference, and I understand that, and I think that's more what Mark Levin has been talking about, is to have specific things, and if you can limit it to those things and it doesn't get beyond those areas, then yeah, that would help. But then again, the problem is, it doesn't matter what you put in writing. If we have judges that just simply forget about it. So, you know, the bigger systemic problem is we have judges that could care less what's in the text.
I don't dispute that. But what I'm simply saying is this guy can't.
No, I understand, yeah. And so I think maybe it's a twofold situation where we have to ultimately do things, and I would just be very careful about that, is if we can keep it within a certain narrow amendment that doesn't get out of control. I think there's certain things that we can do to address the problems that we have. The second thing is, whenever people ignore that text, I mean, they're ignoring a contract that we have with America. That is the contract with America. It'd be just like if you entered into a contract with someone else and a third party came in and just completely reinterpreted it. Who would do that? We need to make sure these judges are respectful of our contract that we've made with America.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.